Julian Guzman was only 11 years old, laughing with his cousin as they played a simple prank. Seconds later, Gonzalo Leon Jr. pulled the trigger that ended his life. What began as innocent fun turned into one of the most shocking and twisted crimes America has seen in 2025. On the last evening of August 2025, in the small community of Humble, Texas, the sun dipped low and the streets carried the usual sounds of families settling into the night. For 11-year-old Julian Guzman, it was just another summer evening filled with mischief and laughter. He had always been the kind of boy who found fun in the simplest things. Whether riding his bike through the neighborhood, playing soccer with his friends, or teasing his siblings with harmless jokes, Julian had a natural ability to make people smile. That night, he and his cousin decided to play a classic childhood prank, one nearly every kid had laughed through at some point: Ding Dong Ditch. The harmless game was simple: ring a doorbell, run away, and laugh at the confusion of whoever opened the door. To them, it was never more than a silly, innocent way to pass the time. But fate directed their laughter to the wrong house. The doorbell they pressed belonged to Gonzalo Leon Jr., a man whose mind was wired with suspicion and fear. Unlike most adults, who might roll their eyes or laugh at such antics, Leon's reaction would be devastating. From inside his home, he interpreted the prank as something far darker. He believed strangers were targeting him, and instead of brushing off the ringing bell, he reached for a gun. The playful steps of two young boys running down the walkway became, in his eyes, a threat he had to confront. What followed would shatter a family, scar an entire neighborhood, and ignite a national debate. In just moments, an innocent game would turn into a tragedy that no one could have imagined. Julian and his cousin dashed away from the front porch, giggling as their feet slapped against the warm concrete. To them, the prank had gone perfectly: ring the bell and vanish before the door opened. They never once imagined the danger lurking behind the threshold. Inside the house, Gonzalo Leon Jr. had already noticed the children. 38 years old, with a tense and suspicious nature, Leon rarely trusted strangers. Neighbors later recalled that he often seemed paranoid, convinced people were watching or planning to disturb him. On that evening, his mistrust exploded into deadly action. When the bell rang, Leon didn't pause to consider who might be outside. He didn't think about the possibility of playful kids or harmless visitors. Instead, he grabbed his firearm, stormed toward the door, and stepped into the night. Julian and his cousin were already running down the walkway, laughter echoing faintly, when Leon raised the gun. In those few seconds, the innocence of childhood collided with the fatal seriousness of an armed man. Witnesses from nearby homes reported hearing a single, sharp gunshot rip through the quiet street. The sound startled families from their living rooms and sent dogs barking wildly. In the glow of a porch light, Julian fell forward, struck in the back. His cousin froze in shock, unable to process that a playful prank had turned into horror. Screaming for help, the cousin tried desperately to wake Julian, who lay motionless on the ground. Leon, without remorse or hesitation, retreated back into his house, leaving the bleeding child outside. Neighbors rushed to the scene, horrified at what they saw. In minutes, sirens approached, filling the night with flashing red and blue. What should have been a laugh-filled memory had transformed into a community's darkest nightmare. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its lights painting the quiet street in red and blue. Paramedics rushed to Julian's side, finding the small boy lying on the pavement, his cousin weeping beside him. The bullet had struck his back, tearing through vital organs and leaving him in critical condition. Neighbors watched in shock, some holding their children close, unable to believe that a prank had resulted in such horror. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting Julian onto a stretcher as his cousin tried to explain through sobs what had happened. His words, broken by panic, repeated the same phrase again and again: "We were just playing." At the hospital, doctors fought tirelessly to save Julian's life. His parents, summoned in a rush, arrived pale with fear, clinging to each other as they were told the severity of the injury. Hours stretched into an eternity as they sat in the waiting room, praying for a miracle. By dawn, the devastating truth became clear. Despite the efforts of surgeons and nurses, Julian's wounds were too severe. On August 31st, 2025, he was pronounced dead. The announcement shattered his family, their cries echoing through sterile halls. News of the tragedy spread quickly, reaching local outlets before sweeping across the nation. Social media erupted with outrage, disbelief, and sorrow. Photos of Julian smiling with friends, playing soccer, and hugging his siblings began to circulate online. For many, the contrast between his joyful life and the cruel way it ended was unbearable. Communities across Texas and beyond demanded justice, questioning how a child's prank could end in a fatal shooting. The conversation quickly shifted to broader debates about fear, guns, and responsibility. In just 24 hours, Julian's story had moved from a neighborhood nightmare to a national tragedy. Detectives from the Harris County Sheriff's Office quickly began piecing together the chain of events that led to Julian's death. The evidence was overwhelming, and one detail stood out as particularly crucial. Julian's cousin had been recording on his phone during the prank. The short video showed the boys laughing as they approached the door, ringing the bell before dashing away. Seconds later, the audio captured the sudden crack of a gunshot, and panicked cries that followed. Investigators described the footage as heartbreaking, undeniable proof that the children posed no threat to the homeowner. On September 1st, authorities formally arrested Gonzalo Leon Jr. and charged him with murder. His mugshot, released to the public, was met with widespread outrage. Many saw not just the face of a man accused of pulling the trigger, but also the embodiment of a culture where suspicion and firearms too often turned innocent moments into irreversible tragedies. Prosecutors announced they would pursue the case aggressively, making it clear that Julian's age and vulnerability would weigh heavily in their arguments. Leon appeared in court days later, wearing a prison jumpsuit and shackles. Reporters crowded the courtroom, eager to capture every detail. Prosecutors emphasized that Julian had been running away unarmed and laughing moments before he was shot. They labeled Leon's actions deliberate and reckless. The defense, however, hinted they would argue Leon acted out of fear, a claim that only fueled public anger. Outside the courthouse, Julian's family stood together, faces pale with grief, as supporters held signs demanding justice. The cousin who had witnessed the killing was shielded from the crowd, still traumatized by the memory of that night. For many, the case had already become a symbol, a story too tragic to forget. The aftermath of Julian's death was marked by overwhelming grief and a sense of disbelief that lingered through the streets of Humble. His family, once filled with the laughter of children, was now silenced by sorrow. Julian's mother described him as a lively boy who dreamed of playing professional soccer, a child who loved school and brought joy to his siblings with endless jokes. Every memory of him seemed like a cruel reminder of what had been stolen. His father, too stunned to speak in public, clutched photographs of his son with tear-filled eyes, unable to understand how such a senseless act could erase a future so bright. In the days following the tragedy, the neighborhood transformed into a place of mourning. Neighbors placed flowers, candles, and stuffed animals in front of the house where Julian collapsed, turning the site into a memorial. Strangers who had never met the boy came to pay respects, leaving cards and prayers. At night, candlelight vigils filled the air with soft hymns and whispered promises of justice. For many parents, the sight of Julian's smiling photos was unbearable, a reminder that their own children might be vulnerable to the same dangers. Community leaders stepped forward, urging calm but also demanding accountability. They called the shooting a reflection of deeper issues, fear, guns, and mistrust, and insisted that Julian's story not be forgotten. Social media amplified these calls, with hashtags spreading across the nation. His name became a rallying cry, a symbol of lost innocence in a world where childhood pranks should never end in death. For Julian's family, the support brought some comfort, but it could not erase the empty chair at the dinner table or the silence where laughter once lived. As the investigation moved forward, prosecutors made it clear that this case would not be treated as anything less than severe. They revealed they were considering upgrading the charge against Gonzalo Leon Jr. to capital murder, citing both Julian's young age and the reckless disregard shown in firing at fleeing children. Leon's bond was set at $1 million, ensuring he would remain behind bars while awaiting trial. For Julian's family, the announcement brought a sense of relief that justice was being pursued, but it also deepened the painful reminder that no legal outcome could ever bring their son back. The case began to dominate local and national headlines. Legal experts debated whether Leon's actions could possibly be justified, with many dismissing the notion outright. Commentators noted that even in states with strong self-defense protections, shooting at an unarmed child running away could never be excused. Television programs featured panels of lawyers, community leaders, and grieving parents, each weighing in on what Julian's death symbolized about American culture. Activists seized on the case as an example of the dangers of widespread gun availability, arguing that a culture of fear had led to tragedy. Others countered with arguments about personal responsibility, mental health, and the consequences of paranoia. But through every debate, Julian's name remained at the center, repeated again and again as a symbol of innocence destroyed. For Julian's classmates and friends, the legal discussions meant little. At his school, desks were decorated with drawings, letters, and messages of love. Teachers struggled to comfort children too young to understand why their friend would never return. For them, it was not a political issue. It was the heartbreaking absence of a boy whose laughter had once filled their playground. Forensic experts carefully examined the evidence from that night, determined to reconstruct the exact sequence of events. Ballistic reports confirmed what witnesses had already described. The bullet struck Julian in the back as he was running away. The trajectory made it impossible to argue that the boy had been approaching or threatening the homeowner. Investigators concluded that Julian posed no danger whatsoever, a fact that prosecutors promised would weigh heavily when presenting the case to a jury. Crime scene analysts documented every detail: the shell casing on the ground, the distance between the doorway and where Julian collapsed, and the footprints of two small boys captured in the dust of the walkway. Each piece of evidence told the same story. Two children had played a prank, and one had paid with his life. The cold precision of the forensic work stood in painful contrast to the innocence of the event that sparked it. In court filings, prosecutors emphasized that Leon had choices. He could have ignored the prank, called the authorities, or even confronted the children verbally. Instead, he chose to open fire. That decision, they argued, revealed not just poor judgment, but an indifference to human life. The defense hinted they might pursue a claim that Leon feared for his safety, but the physical evidence left little room for such arguments. As these details emerged, the public's outrage deepened. People across the country expressed disbelief that anyone could respond with deadly force to children's laughter. Commentators called the case a chilling reminder of how quickly paranoia could transform into violence. For Julian's family, every new revelation was both validation and heartbreak. The evidence made clear what they already knew: their son had never stood a chance. As the legal process unfolded, Julian's story spread far beyond the boundaries of Texas. National news outlets covered every update, turning the case into a mirror for America's ongoing struggles with fear, violence, and responsibility. Commentators asked how the country had reached a point where a child's harmless prank could end in death. Community leaders echoed the same questions, demanding reforms and urging society to reflect on what had been lost. For Julian's family, the trial preparations were almost unbearable. Each court date forced them to relive the horror of that night. Photographs of Julian, once cherished keepsakes, became evidence displayed before strangers in a courtroom. His cousin, still traumatized, prepared to testify about the laughter that turned into screams. The prosecutors reassured the family that they would fight relentlessly for justice, but the weight of the process often felt crushing. Meanwhile, schools and organizations across the state honored Julian's memory. Candlelight vigils continued, and murals were painted with his smiling face. His classmates wrote letters to his family, describing the empty seat in their classroom and the silence on the soccer field where Julian once ran with joy. To them, he was not just a symbol, he was their friend, the boy who always made them laugh. As the trial drew closer, the nation waited for a verdict that would define not only Leon's fate, but also the meaning of accountability. Yet, no sentence could undo the loss. Birthdays passed without Julian's laughter, holidays came with one less voice at the table, and dreams of his future were left unfulfilled. His story, both tragic and unforgettable, stood as a haunting reminder of how fragile innocence can be when confronted by fear and violence.